choosing our targets. So there's a couple of different ways that you can choose a target, and the majority of jazz educators like to talk about guide tones, and these are the thirds and the sevenths of a chord. And these are great because they help define the quality of the chord. It lets you know whether you're playing a major chord, a minor chord, a dominant chord. So they help define the quality of that. And I believe that you can expand the guide tones to include the root and the fifth, and even go further than that and use the upper extensions of the 9th, the 11th, and 13th. But today I want to talk about how I choose targets, and that's a little bit more on the macro level. And the macro level is looking at tonal or key centers. So what I like to have beginning students do is pick out the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the tonal center. And the reason why is because obviously on the 1 chord you're going to be playing the 1, the 3, and the 5. So obviously those fit well on the 1 chord. But if you look at how chord progressions are centered and structured, they all have gravity and weight and how they want to resolve themselves back into that tonal center. And most people, whether they're musicians or not, tend to want to try to hear the 1, the 3, and the 5 inside of a tonal center, regardless of the progression. So if you pick the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the tonal center, sometimes that could mean that you're playing the 7th or the 9th or the 5th of whatever chord that happens to be going on at that moment. So I believe these are great targets to pick. This doesn't mean that you can't use guide tones, but to start out for beginners, because we're trying to work on melodic ideas, using the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the key center is going to be exceptionally well. And by choosing targets, we're thinking about the end in mind. It's just as important to be thinking about what note we want to end on as it is to how are we going to start our line. So one of the other great choices that you have for picking your target is when you are in a tonal or key center and you move to another tonal or key center. Obviously those targets need to change to reflect that key center. But the other thing that you can do is if there's that one chord that happens in a progression where all of a sudden a new note comes. So for example, let's say you have a progression that's all inside the key of C, and all of a sudden we have one chord and it goes to F sharp. That F sharp would be a great target to pick. So what can we do with those targets now that we've kind of talked about how I choose those? Now we use different tools to get to those targets. And I talked about that a little bit last week with the pentatonic scale. And the reason why I have beginning students pick out the pentatonic scale is they're easy. There's a lot of melodic content inside of them. I have found, especially with beginners, that if you take away information, it's less daunting and easier to digest, and it's actually easier to create when we have fewer options and fewer choices. So for those that are more mature improvisers that might be watching this video, it's not that you don't have more options available. It's just for beginners, sometimes it's easier to rid the mind of all of the excess options and narrow them down to one little box to create in. And then when they get creative inside of that box, they can break out of that box, start applying new tools, applying new concepts. So to start out this grand concept of targeting, we're going to be picking our targets and we're going to be using tools to get there. So the pentatonic scale is obviously one of those that I'm introducing. And there's a number of different ways that we can use the pentatonic scale to target. And next week's video is actually going to be implementing some of these ideas, and I want to give you some examples, things that you and your students can use right off the bat. So please feel free to share the video, like the page, but next week we're going to be looking at more specific examples on how I use the pentatonic scale to target notes. So again, to recap today's video, we looked at targeting and choosing the targets in tonal key centers and then highlighting those changes. Look forward to the comments and hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week.